Welcome to the uncharted territories of Paranormal M, where the bizarre becomes the norm. Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay in the loop with our latest mysterious tales. We hope you're ready for a mind-bending ride. The Witches and Warlocks of River Leaf. The place where I live in is a forest area on a small island in Borneo. We've been living here for quite a while. About 40 years or more. This was and still is my parents' place. We were always told by our late grandfather that the trees here have spirits living in them. I think you call it haunted. He used to tell us that he sees it sometimes, especially in the wee hours when he makes his rounds, making sure there were no burglars or any type of threats toward us. He was our guardian. Vigilant and always ready. He would make his rounds at 4 p.m. every single day, built like a bodybuilder, tough as nails. He was well respected in our small community, hence why we believed him when he told us about the witches and warlocks of our village. There was a woman's spirit that would make her rounds of the woods around her property, and Grandpa would always see her. I remember one day when I was sleeping alone in the master bedroom, and in my dreamy state, I saw a woman wearing sleep robes, and I honestly have to say that she was beautiful. I was so much in awe, my jaw must have dropped when I saw her from behind. I couldn't see her face as her hair was blocking it, but that's what I assumed. I know, silly me for wishful thinking. Don't judge me, as I was still relatively young at the time, so blame it on the raging hormones. I couldn't move my body. I was frozen. Call it sleep paralysis, but I remember vividly when the figure moved slowly across my bed. It moved in such a lustful way that I thought I was going to get raped by this demon. Then suddenly, it was on top of me and its face was just blank. Like a blank canvas. It has no nose, no mouth, no eyes, but I could tell it was looking straight into my soul. I struggled to move, but I couldn't get myself free of this spirit that was pinning me down. I tried to pray with the Our Father, but kept messing up the words in my head. Then the worst happened. It started to choke me. I felt her grip on my throat, blocking my airway, and I honestly thought I was going to die that night. But I kept trying to move and get free from its grip. Tried praying harder, but in the end, I passed out from her choking. Miraculously, I woke up the next day thinking I was dead, but thank God I survived. And from that day onwards, I always sleep with the lights on. The Witches and Warlocks of River Leaf. Story number 2, part 2. The area where I live in is somewhat of a rural part of the island. It's on a hill and the roads are creepy at night, where you have to pass through lots of banana trees and bushes to get to our house. So the setting at night can give someone who's not a brave soul the shivers if you're not used to this kind of place, where no one hears you if you scream, as the next-door neighbors are certainly not close by. When I was about 10 years old, I used to see a bonfire at the front yard, and people around it chanting and dancing, like in the movies. And that was all I thought of it, me imagining them in my head, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. I could really see spirits when I was younger, and now thinking back, I know that I had actually seen these chantings, like it was some kind of ritual. And that brings us to this story. The local folks here know that there was a shaman living within the village, among the many residents. But what many of them didn't know was that this shaman performed abortions and was dwelling in the dark arts of black magic. So one day when me and my buddies were cycling around the village, we happened to stop in front of the alleged shaman house. We got the hint because of the way the house was built. Wooden, rotten house with a lot of bamboo growing around the whole house. It was creepy, and so us being nosy teenagers decided to check the place out. We parked our bikes outside the property and started to walk up to the front porch. There were dolls hanging inside of the house, small ones that looked like they were hand-sewn. The place was bare except for rubbish scattered around, and the only way I can explain the atmosphere is that it felt heavy. Like the oxygen was being drained from us from something that we couldn't see. The whole house had a very weird, musty smell, and it was sickening knowing that it was once used to murder innocent babies. It was said to imagine the life that could have been lived, but instead taken from them by their own parent, as it's still very much against the law to abort a child in my country. So many young girls who got pregnant on accident wanted nothing to do with having a child outside of marriage, so they come to these kinds of places as a solution. Hence, why it is so dangerous for these girls to go through such a thing with an untrained shaman. Some of these did not go well for the mothers either. So there were definitely angry and unclean spirits still roaming in that house, and the longer we stayed there, the more we felt sick to our stomachs. So we decided to move along and go home. It was when we were on our bikes that we heard something coming from inside the house. At first it was faint, but it grew louder and louder. It was laughter, the kind where you could hear the evil in their voice. Then we saw smoke started coming out of the roof, and before we could see anything else, we booked it out of there and went straight home. And since then, we never went anywhere near that house, ever again. The Witches and Warlocks of River Leaf, Part 3. I used to sleep with my window wide open to let in the cold air, as the island that I reside in is quite hot and humid. So with the safety grill and also a mosquito net, it was very soothing to let the fresh air into the room at night when I slept. It was the whole night experience of insects and the occasional wind noise that was all so soothing. I also loved to leave the windows wide open so I could see the light of the moon, and like I said, the night experience. However, one night changed it all. When I was about to sleep and still looking out the wide open window, I felt a cold breeze pass through, and all of a sudden I could hear manic laughter. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but I knew at that moment that I had not fallen asleep and was very much still awake. Then, as if on cue, I saw what looked like a woman's figure flying past by. When I closed and reopened my eyes again to make sure that there was a woman flying past by my open window, that's what I was seeing. The woman was on a broomstick and had a nose like that of a bird, like the ones that you see in cartoons and movies with witches in them. You heard me right, I saw a living witch, and the only way that I can describe her laughter was maniacal. I froze in my bed and didn't know what to do at that moment. I perched up to see if the woman would pass again, but the laughing disappeared, and it all went silent. I got up and closed all of the windows and blinds and never opened the windows at night again to avoid seeing it. I believed that these were witches roaming around my village, as it was a full moon at the time. This part of the island has always had a creepy vibe to it too. I was told by my late grandmother that these parts of our land were once used as a spot where during World War II, the Japanese used to massacre their captives by chopping off their heads. and made it a dumping ground around our property. Coupled with thick jungle, you can imagine the aura that we're living in, which is dark and unnerving. Yet we managed to live here until now. I remember one time that our gate was pushed as it wasn't fully installed and in place while my mother was pregnant with me and my youngest sister. I saw the whole incident in front of me, and I was only about 8 or 9 years old at the time, but I remember vividly how it happened. The gate only started to fall when my mother turned her back to it, and it looked as if it was deliberately pushed, and my mother fell to her knees while the heavy gate was on top of her. It all happened in a matter of seconds, and all I could remember after that was that my father and cousins were screaming and running towards my mother to lift up the gate. It took 3 of them to lift the gate. Fortunately, my sister didn't sustain any injuries, as she came out a healthy kid. My father was a big skeptic regarding the paranormal and always told us that it was all coincidence and that we imagined it, as he never saw or explained it himself. Until one day when he was sleeping on his bed alone and felt someone kick him off the bed. Dazed and still in a sleepy state, he told us about the incident, but still didn't believe that it was paranormal. He said that it was unexplainable and was never deterred on staying on this land. One time I also saw a figure pass by our kitchen, and this was when I went to go get some water. The figure was a black mass like a shadow on the wall, but I knew that this thing was looking straight at me and with eyes wide open. I just froze and stared at it. Then in a few seconds, which felt like hours, the figure just disappeared into the window, but I was already so spooked that I ran back to the hall where my whole family was watching TV. I came in screaming, telling them what I had just witnessed, and my mother, being the strong Christian, went into the kitchen. Armed with holy water, she started praying and sprinkled it all over our house. She also felt it and knew that the spirit was still roaming around the house and only left after intense prayer. The Witches and Warlocks of Riverleaf, Part 4. This is a compilation of paranormal stories that me and my family have experienced in and around our home. I want to start off by saying that my mother is a devout Christian, and she was not afraid of spirits or demons, as she would call them. She used to hear chantings and talking, but couldn't understand the language while she was praying at night, as if these spirits were trying to stop her from praying and distracting her as much as they could so she would stop. But my mother would never let these spirits deter her from praying, and so she would pray even harder to fend them off. On one occasion while she was praying, one of these spirits came to disturb her. She took holy water and sprinkled it upwards where the voices were coming from, and immediately heard screams of pain as if they were splashed with hot boiling water. My mother would describe this as spiritual warfare. Night after night, she would repeat this and never gave up the fight. Kudos to Mom. Although she had a solid faith, there were times when these spirits would torment my mother in different ways. For a few months, she would be disturbed by a male spirit where it would come to her when she was about to sleep and would feel a hairy spirit sit on her chest to the point where my mother couldn't breathe. It was like dog's fur, thick, had a foul smell. All my mother could do was pray harder and rebuke it until it would eventually leave, but then come back the next night to torment her again. It got to the point where my mother would leave all the lights on while she slept, and as she couldn't get much sleep and would be screaming to them to just leave her alone. This disturbed us deeply, and I would run downstairs to see what was happening when I would hear her screaming at something that we couldn't see. I believed her, as when I would come downstairs, the hairs on my arms would stand and I could feel the evil presence, and sometimes smell something musty like wet dog smell around the house. But I would never see animals around. As quickly as it came, it would disappear. Lady from the Island. Paranormal experience. Let me start off by telling you about the creepy things that happened to me these past few years. Then I'll get into the backstory. I have been followed by a so-called woman spirit since I was a little kid. I would see this woman dart in and out of the shadows whenever I was alone. This figure would never show herself when there were other people around me, and growing up with this situation has not always been very easy for me. I always felt alone and scared as I was too ashamed to tell friends or family, and because of this, I kept it to myself and just continued living. Like I said earlier, this woman has been following me since I was a little kid, and even throughout my teenage years, it didn't stop. She would appear in my dreams, often dressed in white, as cliche as it sounds. It was how I remembered her. When I was in the shower, I would often feel eyes watching me, and on a few occasions I'd actually see red glowing eyes staring intently at me. But as I grew older, I was less intimidated by her presence. Once I was just so tired of having the feeling of being watched while I showered and saw those all too familiar glowing red eyes, I just lost it, splashed water from the bucket I was using and started screaming profanities at the thing until it left me alone. I've asked a friend who apparently can see into the spirit world and could see spirits since she was a young girl. I told her about my situation and she agreed to come to my place to have a glimpse of this woman's spirit. I didn't tell her about how the spirit looked like, but after her visit she explained to me what she saw. Long hair, white long dress, and an expressionless face. That was her description, and at first I thought that her description was so common as almost all female ghost spirits have that description, and just chalked it up to a lucky guess and moved on with life as usual. But after her visit, the spirit became more active, and I was seeing her way more than usual. After about a week, I had a horrific encounter with this female spirit and was attacked with sleep paralysis. Then, the very next day, my friend met up with me and told me that she had a vision about me. I had one of the biggest shocks of my life when she started explaining, and it was dead on. She said that this woman started following me since I was a kid, when me and my family were on vacation on an island in Borneo. She went on to say that we were all so happy and excited to be there, and she saw me playing soccer with my family and friends. We explored the island, and we were all having a good time. Then one of the adults there started jumping down into the sea from the jetty. The water was deep in that area and surpassed my height, so when I jumped in, I couldn't stand on the sand and I started to drown. She saw me struggling in the water when suddenly a woman in the water caught me and brought me up to the surface, and I was safe again. I was almost in tears when my friend stopped talking and asked me if I was all right. I was in such shock that I couldn't say anything. I knew she wasn't lying because, first of all, she didn't know that I played soccer, and all of my friends know that I don't play soccer too. It was after this event of almost dying that I hated that game and wanted nothing to do with it. And how would she have known that I went to an island and almost drowned there? I explained that it was one of our adult friends that caught me and brought me back to shore, but she said that it was partly the spirit of the woman. She somehow knew that I couldn't swim, and until this day I can't swim even if my life depended on it. She went on to explain that the woman's spirit started to follow me after that, and would be jealous if I were with another woman. which explained why all my past relationships would fail and end up pretty badly. She told me that there would only be one woman who could break the bond between me and this spirit, and only then will I get married. My friend said that when she went to my place, almost immediately she felt a malicious presence and could feel that spirit didn't want her to be there. It's been a few years since I last saw this spirit woman who followed me all those years, tormenting me and scaring me. I'm happily married now, and I can only pray that this lady from the island never shows herself to me ever again. Story number 6, Pearl Garden. When I was about 7 to 8 years old, my family moved to a new house. We had to move because my dad was renovating the old one, so we had to stay at this new place for the time being. The new house was located close to the main hospital, and within the housing area was a graveyard. An old one, might I add. The new house we stayed in used to belong to a small family. For some reason, they reluctantly sold it to my dad. This will play into what happens after we move in. Weird things started happening during the first few nights of staying in that house. We could hear all kinds of noises like random knockings on the door, especially the kitchen door. Now, to explain a little bit about the layout, this was a semi-detached house, and the kitchen was at the back overlooking a jungle. The whole area used to be a swamp before it was turned into a residential plot. Because of this, the jungle part of it was thick and had lots of banana trees. So every time you went into the kitchen to use the sink, you would face the jungle, and at night, this was very creepy. More and more strange incidents started happening. Me as a kid used to see shadows passing by the rooms, hear strange voices, and sometimes out of nowhere, I would hear my dad sneezing or coughing when he wasn't even home. And I remember after seeing these shadows, I would get sick and had to stay home instead of going to school. And yes, it was that bad, and to call that coincidence just wasn't right. One time when we had some family friends staying over, and one of them was using our bikes when the rest of the family in the house was just hanging out and playing video games. It was 7 p.m. and we were told by our mom to come back into the house. But we just ignored them and continued playing on our bikes. We dared to ignore their advice due to the fact that my dad was outstationed. And all of a sudden I heard really loud footsteps coming from the jungle area heading towards us. It was the sound of heavy boots, and then I realized that it was marching. Couldn't believe my ears, but I heard it clearly, and it was loud. It sounded like a platoon of soldiers, and their movements were in sync. I froze for a few seconds, and when I snapped out of it, I screamed at the top of my lungs, calling my friend to run to the main door and get inside. We threw our bikes on the floor and ran for our lives. When we got to the door, it wouldn't budge, and so we screamed for them to open it up. It felt like hours waiting for them to let us in, and I could hear the marching getting closer and closer. Then all of a sudden the door opened and we flew inside the house and locked it behind us. We were all frantic at this point. Then our moms emerged from the bedroom and asked what was going on. So we explained it, and all of us got a shiver down our spines. The hair on our arms were standing, and I felt that the spirits were still present outside. Being a devout Christian, our mom started praying and decided to go outside to the back of the kitchen to see what was scaring all of us. I must have looked pale as a sheet of paper. My sisters stopped playing video games, and we all hugged each other. About 10 minutes passed by when our mom came back to the living room with us, and they were visibly freaked out as well. So for the rest of the night, we all slept in one room. Many other strange things happened there. My sister also had a weird experience one time when she was watching TV in the living room. There was a knock on the front door. When she opened it, she thought she saw my next-door neighbor who always hung out with me. But when she looked inside the house, looking for me, and looked back, he was gone. And it all happened in a matter of seconds, so it was impossible for my neighbor to have walked away that fast. My parents found weird things being kept in the house. I can't recall what it was, but it was tied up inside some sort of cloth. When we asked the church members, they had said that it could be some kind of cursed object to haunt us and made us leave the house. And eventually we did move out from that place, and thank God nothing followed us. I believe it was put there by a previous tenant. Perhaps they were unhappy that they had to move out. But the thing that puzzles me the most is, why sell the house if you don't want us living in there? And why plant a curse in the house? Till this day, I can't wrap my head around it, but I'm glad that we moved. The Demon of X62, story number 7. These stories happened to me when I was still in high school. My father had a project in Sabah, and so I had to move along with my mom and younger sister to follow our dad. He was always stationed out in a different rural area, so when all these strange things started to happen, we were by ourselves without my dad. All of these occurrences happened in and around our apartment complex, which was located at the end of the top of a small hill. We didn't know how much of a mistake it really was moving in here, and I'm glad that we no longer reside there. Everything was going fine when we first moved in, but the longer we stayed there, the more experiences we had, and things were heading downhill pretty quick. We kept feeling an evil presence in the apartment, and we would tell that it was full of hate and anger. That energy affected us as a family, and we were constantly arguing and fighting over almost everything. One night when I was reading a book on my bed, I left my windows open, and while reading, I suddenly had goosebumps. From the corner of my eye, I could see a woman figure with long black hair appear, and it was looking at me. I stopped reading and just froze in my bed. The figure then slowly disappeared out the window. For context, we were living on the second floor, and there was no way somebody could have climbed up there and down the window grills that fast and actually peek in through the small grill. My mother adopted a cat, and living inside the apartment, its behavior was very unpredictable. At times it would be very calm and gentle, and at times it would be wild and would start to chase me and my sister. It would also stare at the corner of the room with wide eyes and make weird noises. This creeped me and my sister out a lot. One time my second elder sister came to visit me, and I told her about the scary things that had been happening in the apartment. She just brushed it off and told us not to be scared. At the moment after, she said that these scratches could be seen on her thighs, and we had goosebumps. I believe the entity felt challenged and wanted us to be scared of it. Also, I remember one time when I was walking home alone around maybe 12 a.m. or 1, and to get to the apartment I had to walk past a hill. Even through the walkway, it was pretty well lit. I was always unnerved to walk by it. Halfway through, I heard and saw something roll down the hill to my right. Then I heard laughter coming from those hills. So I walked faster. Unfortunately, that was the end of that. A couple of days after that incident, while I was on a bus home, the conductor was looking at the hills when we were passing through them and just told me that he heard stories of spirits living in those hills. And particularly one called Babylon, which was a ghost head that had no body, just the entrails of its guts. This entity was said to be of a human who dabbled in witchcraft and during the wee hours would fly with its head seeking blood. Especially from pregnant women, and I was also told that these entities also seek out stillborns and would sometimes suck the fetus from the sleeping mother. The mother wouldn't even realize it, would often be told by doctors that there was no fetus inside their bellies, and must have been a miscarriage. After listening to the bus conductor that was there where all these kinds of entities were living in the hills, I rarely came back home after midnight just to avoid that stretch of road. Once when I'd come home late, I was passing by a car that was parked and I saw a head inside. At first I thought that someone was waiting in the car, but the engine wasn't running, so I took a closer look. And I saw that the head had no body attached to it. I looked at the side mirror and couldn't see the head, but saw it when I peeked inside through the window. It was facing straight ahead and slowly started to turn towards me. I ran home as fast as I could and locked the door behind me. I came down with a bad fever the next day, and it only got better in about a week. A lot of bad things were happening in that area as tensions of the families staying there were visibly strained. My neighbors living below me were constantly fighting as well, to a point where the husband wanted to commit suicide. On top of this, my family also suffered the same. Let's start with my eldest sister, who changed her ID address to the apartment X62 and was plagued with so much negativity that she tried to kill herself by swallowing a bunch of pills. Fortunately, she survived, and she was hospitalized. Her life only became better once she changed the address on her ID. My mother was going through depression, was also a wreck at the time. My youngest sister, who was living with me, and my mom always said that they saw things that I couldn't understand. She was really young at the time and was always afraid to be alone in that apartment. I wasn't spared from the negativity, and it tried to end my life 3 times during the period that I was living in that apartment. My family was falling apart, and times were really tough. I always felt abandoned and alone when I was living there, even though I had a good close friend or two. Even the security guards were seeing things around the apartment, especially at our block. They would see a woman dressed in white walking around the block and would disappear into the hills. So much negativity, so much suffering was felt during our stay there. It was said that the land was plagued by a woman's spirit who committed suicide a while back where the block stood. And it's been spreading her negativity and her energy and hatefulness towards the tenants there. The management denied all of these, but we knew what we experienced there, and what we saw and felt was real. So to the tenants living there now, I pray that this woman doesn't put you through what they had us go through, as I'm never wanting to go back there. Story number 8, The Iceman. When I was about 15 or 16, I was doing my Duke of Edinburgh Award, which involved camping and orienteering. We pitched our tents in a low valley in the mountains. It was at the foot of the Slieve Donard in Northern Ireland. Me and my friend carelessly made our guide ropes super long. We made them so long that everybody was tripping over them in daylight, that the tent was up and we couldn't be bothered to fix it. I woke up in the night to footsteps and heard someone brush against our tent. I didn't think much of it, assuming one of the boys was taking a leak. I tried to get back to sleep. The next morning, as the aroma of sizzling bacon was filling the air, I asked who bumped our tent last night. Everyone denied it. But someone walked round our tent. A few other people heard the same thing, and the 2 class clowns or jokers in the group said that they were fast asleep, didn't hear a thing. I thought they would have at least joined in with the I heard something, trying to freak us out bit. One of the more sensible guys in our group said, someone walked around my tent, but I noticed they didn't have light. One of our teachers, who was pitched further away, admitted to hearing footsteps too. Our Duke of Ed facilitator finally said, "You're not the first group to hear those footsteps, you know." We all turned around perplexed. He asked us if we had seen the ice house further down the valley. This was built to preserve ice for food storage before electricity. Yeah, we all had seen it. Did you read the plaque on it? I hadn't noticed it. No one seemed to. But my buddy Andrew spoke up. Yeah, for the man who died in it. The facilitator nodded. I laughed it off and headed back to my tent to get my mug for a hot cup of tea. Tripped over the guide ropes. It suddenly struck me, how did this person who walked around our tent so close? He didn't trip over the guide ropes. Cherry tobacco smoke. Story number 9. When I was younger, my family rented an old house that we lived in until I was 5. At this point, it's quite hard for me to remember much from that time since I was so young. There are a handful of things that I've been told that happened, mostly having to do with me at the house. So I decided to finally share some. My father told me that when I was very young, before I could even walk, I would sit on the living room floor and just stare at something. My eyes would follow something that he couldn't see until one day. He went to go get me my bottle and left me in the living room with a raccoon toy. As he rounded the corner from the hall into the living room, he saw me staring at a glowing ball. It was just floating there and then disappeared. Another time I was maybe 1 or 2, and my older sister was playing with one of her friends. I was in one of those rolling baby walkers, just doing whatever. My sister and her friend were playing with the ball, even though my mom and dad had told her to take the ball outside to throw it around. One of them threw the ball and missed. The ball slammed into a glass ceiling light and smashed it. I happened to be under that light. You'd think that the shards of glass would hit me somewhere, but it didn't. Even the tray of the walker was clear of glass. It had completely avoided me. My father believes it was the same thing that caused the glowing ball of light. My father is a firm believer in ghosts, having many experiences that are not easily explainable. He is insistent that the house had someone or something in it. A few of his experiences were seeing a shadow in the window in the basement when he was doing laundry. It wasn't a shadow of feet or something that could have been human, since that window was close to the ground. It was a man's head and shoulders. Another one of the weird things about that house was that my father would smell cherry tobacco smoke in the stairway. Both of my parents smoked at that time, but neither of them used cherry tobacco. We moved out of that house when I was 5, and of course moved into a house that was built in the 1800s. Scary place. I won't lie, but it was home. The basement of the place was dirt, with a set of boarded up stairs that I never learned where they really led to. Next to those stairs was a door that led to another dirt room with one window. I was terrified of that basement. I didn't learn how to do laundry for a long time because of it. Even before anything happened in that house, it gave me a weird vibe. My mother and sister would always joke about the children in the walls. I thought they were just joking around and trying to scare me. It was only later that they told me that they would hear sounds like children playing from the walls. That once they talked about it, it stopped. Great, totally not scary at all, nope. Not to mention the number of bats that could just break into the attic whenever they pleased. I only remember one experience from that house. There may have been more, but my memory has really gone out the window. I was alone in those big old houses. My mom and dad were at work and my sister was at a Halloween party. It was close to 9 p.m. and I was sitting on the couch in the living room watching some videos on my computer. Just to give a quick picture, the living room was large, and I can only remember the couch and the TV. The couch was up against the wall, and across the side of the couch was a window. My sister's door was in the living room as well, and the stairs went up to my room as well as my parents' room. In the winter, I would sleep on the floor in my sister's room since we didn't have heat, and it got ungodly cold upstairs, so I wasn't paying attention, drawn in by whatever I was watching, until I heard a noise that made me look up. It was a soft tapping on the window across from me. When I looked up, there was something in the window, a shadow of a head and shoulders. Something in my mind told me it was a young boy. I don't know why. I know it wasn't the reflection of my head in the window because it would have been lit up by the computer screen. Something made me unable to move, either fear or just difficulty of processing what was happening. It couldn't have been a person. The window was at least 10 feet off the ground. Honestly glad it wasn't a person, and when I finally got the ability to move, I bolted in my sister's room and stayed there until someone came home. I don't think I told anyone for a while until my mom and sister told me about the noises from the walls. We've since moved out and nothing creepy has happened at the places I've lived since then. Do not play in graveyards. Story number 10. Growing up, and still to this day, I have loved the spooky and scary things. Supernatural and paranormal stories were my favorite to read and watch, no matter how much it frightened me. I was obsessed with ghosts and cemeteries, all things creepy but not crawly, and the adrenaline of the fright. So when a teenaged me was offered to play hide and seek in the largest, very haunted graveyard in my city, I of course said yes. The graveyard was ran by the church that it surrounded, a decent-sized cathedral surrounded by a mile of graves each way, just to give you a visual of the size of this place. My friends and I had planned to go on a day that we knew no one would be there to kick us out for playing along the graves. The week leading up to us playing the game, it had been storming, bringing cold air down after a heat wave. The day we went was the first day that week it hadn't rained. Wet or not, we had to go now or wait a whole other week of storms. Because of the chill the rain brought, a thick fog had set over the city. Perfect for a spooky game of hide and seek in a graveyard. We all met up at my best friend's house. We'll call him John, as he lived not even 3 full blocks away from the place. Now, John also loved the paranormal like I did, except he was also a huge scaredy cat. So when we went, it couldn't be at night. It was barely past noon when we started that way. A common friend of mine and John's, Hannah, the one who came up with the idea, and of my boyfriend Greg, at that time, were the other 2 people to play this game with us. Greg was a comfort for John, as Greg was and still is a skeptic of all of this. We didn't have much trouble getting in. After a long minute of walking, we made it to the cathedral. It was still decently bright outside for being a cloudy day with thick fog, but in the graveyard everything felt darker. Maybe it was because it was littered with as many trees as there were graves, or maybe it was because superstitions were getting to us. But either way, John and I came down with bad feelings. While Hannah was explaining how she will be the seeker first, since she came up with the idea, John whispered in my ear about his bad feeling. Admitting to him about mine, though, would only have scared him more, and really wanting to do this with everybody, I told him not to worry while I pushed my own instincts aside in the process. Anything for the adrenaline, right? And if anyone sees a ghost, make sure you record it, Hannah had said. Greg rolled his eyes, not saying anything. But he was right. Almost everybody in our city had a personal scary story about this graveyard specifically. But no one had ever been able to provide sufficient evidence. And if a bunch of professionals couldn't capture anything, I doubted 4 teenagers would be able to. I was about to ask her if this was the point of getting us, when John pulled out my shirt and asked everybody if they heard a noise. like a little girl giggling, he had said. Hannah laughed excitedly, telling us the story of the little kids being rumored to be haunting this place. But there are just a few of the many entities here, she says, happily to the group. John was going to say something else, but Hannah clapped her hands and told us to disperse while she turned around and started counting. John gave me a pleading look, but I returned it with an encouraging smile and took off. I was hoping Greg would follow me, so we could have a little of our own fun while we waited to be found. But Greg was a competitive person, so if he was playing a game, he was playing a game. I hid behind a few trees, a few large graves, always respectful of where I stepped, before I found the perfect spot behind a mausoleum. Those small buildings for multiple graves, usually no bigger than a 5x5. Those things. The front part faced a main path of the graveyard, but the other three sides had large bushes, almost as tall as the thing itself, and with just enough space between the building and the bush for me to hide in. They weren't that thick, but they do a decent job. It actually could have fitted easily 6 people without touching each other in that back. It was one of those spots where it was so obvious somebody would hide there that the seeker would look past it because it was too obvious, if that makes any sense. I was there for maybe 5 minutes before I heard someone walking towards me. I crouched real low so they wouldn't see me standing there behind that bush. I couldn't see too well, but I could tell that the person walking was a guy. When he got close enough, I heard Greg whisper my name. I guessed he probably had a similar thought to me. However, I was hiding, and he didn't know where I was hiding. And he was walking past the bushes where I could easily and quietly follow him to jump out and scare him. Yes, it would have given me away, and he probably would scream, but a jump scare in a thick fog in a graveyard, too good of a chance to pass up. It was like it was being handed to me in a silver platter. Perfect scare. I crept down, walking in a sort of duck walk, following Greg next to him to jump out in front of the bush on the main road. Just as he started to turn to come around the front of the thing, I sprang up and yelled out, "Boom!" I could feel the smile fall from my face as I was met with nothing. There was no scream, no surprise, no reaction of any sort, as Greg wasn't standing there. In fact, no one was standing there. I remember looking around confused, but seeing literally nobody. Not even someone trying to hide as a prank on me. Something cold passed through me then, and I shivered. Maybe I should find a different spot, I remember thinking to myself. So there I was, 10 minutes later in a new spot, tucked in between a grave and a tree directly behind it. I kept peering around to make sure if I saw someone, they didn't see me. It was maybe 2 minutes, if that, when I heard crunching of the gravel that made up the pathways. I peeked over the grave and saw Hannah and John walking on one of the paths over, like 6 rows of graves in between the path in front of me and the path that they were on. I quietly giggled, watching them each look behind things or up trees, as if any of us would climb, and talking to each other. "Greg!" Hannah called out in a singing-type voice, followed by my name, like she was taunting us to come out. Didn't she know the rules of this game? So I jerked my leg back when I felt something touch it. I was relieved to see that it was just a leaf that scrapped up against me. Hannah and John were now further away, still walking away from me, and I had the brilliant idea to follow them. I figured they'd never suspect to look behind them for me. I had just taken a step when something full-on grabbed my ankle and pulled. Not sure how it happened, but when it pulled, I at the same time looked down to see what it was, and when the pull knocked my balance off and I fell, my head collided with the grave right above my eyes. But it wasn't done when I was on the ground. Oh no, my vision was blurred and I could see what it was. Or rather, I couldn't. Everything was blurred, and it was just something was dragging me. I was on my stomach, screaming, pulling up grass and weeds, trying to find something to grip as I was being dragged God knows where. Hannah and John weren't even out of my sight when I went down. I knew they had to have heard me, that they'd come running to help, but they didn't. Finally, my fingers caught the edge of one of those plaque graves, the one where the stone lies flat on the ground. There wasn't much help, but it provided me with enough edge to use to pull against whatever was pulling me. The slightest resistance, and I was let go. I didn't know if my vision was blurry still from hitting my head or from the tears, but I saw nothing and scrambled up quickly, running in the last direction I saw someone. However, when I started running, something else did too. Following close behind me, I found Greg, first basically running smack dab into him, who was panicking and looking me over. He told me he heard my screams and ran as fast as he could to come get me. He asked me why my shirt and pants were covered in mud and if I knew that my forehead was bleeding. None of that mattered to me, though, because something was chasing me, and I had said as much as I really could, but Greg assured me that when he saw me running towards him, no one was behind me. "Game or not, we're finished. Let's go find Hannah and John," Greg said, and he took my hand. I remember just crying the entire way after telling Greg that last direction I saw and let them go in. It didn't take long for us to find them, and an even shorter time for us to leave. Greg didn't fully believe me when I told him what happened, but he knew me well enough to know that I don't scare. Like, truly, terrified scared. He wouldn't say it was a ghost, but he would admit it was something. His thoughts were more along the lines of crazy hobo, though. Hannah was pissed at me. She was mad that I didn't pull out my phone and record anything. Got even more upset when I sarcastically apologized because reaching for my phone is the least of my concerns. Which she countered with, "You should have been recording the whole time like me." Yeah, we aren't really friends anymore. John didn't say anything at me, really, besides that, happy that I was okay and asking what he could do to help me. It wasn't until after that I was okay that he let me know that he had been upset with me. I guess he wasn't all right with me brushing off his concerns and then turning around and getting attacked. Irony, or karma, on me, I guess. I had gotten a concussion from slamming my head on that grave, but no other damage had been done, and it was another 2 months after that before I'd even look at what Hannah had recorded. But eventually I did, and I still wish I hadn't. Hannah and John might not have seen me peeking over the graves looking at them, but her camera did. Almost clear as day, you can see my head a little ways off popping up behind the grave, and just behind me, where a huge-ass tree was supposed to be, was a very tall and very dark figure. Then they continued walking. The camera was slightly swaying back and forth, meaning they weren't really holding it to record anything, but it still should have picked up my screams. It didn't. In fact, you couldn't hear anything. Not even Hannah or John talking. Just a white static noise, even though Hannah's camera was basically new. Hannah eventually sent the footage to our city's local paranormal investigative team, who took one look at it and claimed that it was fake. It's been years, but every time I drive by that graveyard, I feel that thing staring at me, waiting for me to come back inside. I haven't. Haven't gone into any creepy cemetery or graveyard since. And if you do tell me to go to one, make sure to respect the dead. Mirror and me. I've always seen things. Things some are afraid to see. Things some are afraid to even think about. During my younger days, I thought nothing of it, just that it was part of our everyday life. People around me brushed me off every time I told them about it. When I reached high school, I did my research, unable to bear the judgy eyes that people gave me. still found no answer that could make me satisfied. Days went on like nothing happened. I could still feel them. Moreover, I could feel someone looking at me with envy. That was when I started noticing odd things in my mirror. Every time I look into it, I feel that the reflection doesn't belong to me. Since then, I was afraid to look into a mirror. Just the mirror in my bedroom. My mother always sleeps with me, so I always felt safe. But it all changed one night. As usual, my mother and I slept, but that day I felt uneasy. I felt as if something bad was going to happen. In my sleep, I could feel someone caressing my face. I thought it was my mother, but I could feel her right next to me snoring. So, mustering up all my courage, I slightly opened my eyes. Not fully, just a bit. What I saw that night haunts me even today. I saw myself standing and staring at me. At this point, people would say that it was a dream, but I know that I was fully awake. I think you all must know what scared me that day was not seeing myself, but its lifeless eyes that looked at me with envy. The same envy that I saw in my reflection. I slowly covered my face with the sheets without making it realize that I was awake. Suddenly, I felt a spiky hand touch my eyes, trying to grab them. At this moment, I could only pray. I heard a sigh, and I could hear it leave, so I pulled my sheets down a bit and watched myself go into the mirror. I know it was no sleep paralysis, because of course I was awake and saw it happening before my eyes. You may believe it or not, but from that day, my mirror is covered. To some, it may be like a story, but to me, it was a nightmare that I still try to forget. Even now, I see things, and that's a story for another time. Even wardrobes can be terrifying. Have you ever felt a shiver down the spine, a feeling of goosebumps, a sense of chill even though you've been to that place for the first time? That was what I felt when I entered my old house for the first time. I have many times had this sensation when I would go near a few places, and have found that those places are not suitable for residents. But this time I wanted to be skeptical about it. Just because every member of my family, including me, had fallen in love with it. Had a big backyard, beautiful garden, it was just perfect. Things went well for months. Days were beautiful, except that I always felt that something was going to happen and it was going to be wrong. I was a messy and clumsy person, suddenly had urges to keep my wardrobe doors closed all the time. It may seem silly, but the people who know me knows, pretty much as a fact, that I always kept my wardrobe doors open just to go for easy access to my dresses. But now I really wanted to keep the doors closed because I could feel someone standing there. Just standing. Though they were just standing there, what I sensed there was absolute hatred. A level of hatred that I've never felt before. Even now thinking about it makes me shudder. One night I was so tired from my schoolwork that I hit my bed without my mind and my surroundings. In my dream I saw myself sleeping, but what I saw after shook me. I saw what seemed like a small boy but without a head. At first he seemed playful, but as he came near me I felt the same hatred I felt near the wardrobe. Before I could do anything, he started squeezing my throat with bony yet soft fingers, and the grip would tighten every time I would try to struggle to free myself from it. When those cold fingers tightened, all I could do was scream, but not a single word came. Thought it was the end of me, but it seemed like I managed to scream to my mother in real life. My mom came in and saw me screaming and struggling. She somehow managed to wake me up and ask me about it. I was so shook that I couldn't manage to answer her. Again, after some days, I saw it with my own eyes. I was about to go to sleep, so I switched off the light. I was about to lay down, and that was when I caught sight of it. The same boy from my sleep was standing right at the wardrobe, but luckily for me, his back was turned towards me. I really had to make sure that what I saw was real, so I went near and tried to grab him, but all I felt was cold air pass through the palms of my hands. Terrified, I let out a scream, but before anybody could come, he just disappeared. I told about this to my parents, and the next day they brought a person to purify the house. I felt that after the purification, the house had really brightened up, and after a few years, my dad got a transfer, so we had to move. I didn't have the heart to leave, but I had to. On the day of the move, after packing everything, I just took a look at the house, and no one would believe me, but I saw a beautiful child waving at me. My old ghost neighbor, story number 13. I was around 8. Me and my family were living in New Orleans. I was playing in an area outside of my house, and I noticed this older Haitian man who lived a few houses down was sitting under one of our apple trees. We were somewhat close. I would occasionally go play cards at his house, since he lives alone and my parents thought he was lonely. The man was in a wheelchair, and I sat down near him and talked to him. He gave me an apple, but it was incredibly sweet and unlike anything I had tasted before or since. We talked a bit, and he told me that he'll see me again, and walked away. Later that day, we found out that he had died the night before, and even later in life, I found out that the man was some sort of voodoo priest from his granddaughter who I was friends with. She also claimed to see him from time to time. This story didn't end here, as I saw the man a few more times. We would talk, and he would always give me an apple. I even continued to see him, though we moved out of the country around 4 more times. He just showed up when I entered middle school. I chalked him up as my imaginary friend. I saw him again in a crowd at my high school graduation. I looked at him. He disappeared. As I was into voodoo at this point, it didn't faze me that much, and I realized that he may have been more than an imaginary friend. The last time I saw him, and the most recent time, was 2 years ago. I was in a really, really dark place, and I was in a crappy job. My girlfriend had just left me. I was really depressed and battling with alcohol and other illicit substances, but I was actually considering ending it all. And right as I was about to drink a bunch and probably jump off my balcony, I saw the man on the couch. He told me that he had missed seeing me, but he knew that I had been busy. We played cards, go fish, our old game. He actually got me back down, and right before he left, he said that if I gave him all of my Coke, he would leave me some apples. I agreed, and he gave me a few. I passed out, and when I woke up, I still had the apples, but all of my Coke was gone. He's one of the main reasons I stopped doing stuff, and didn't get that badly addicted to them. He probably saved my life. Story number 14. The Ghost in the Video Chat. I grew up in a house that's well over 100 years old by now. It used to be a barn, and it got converted into a proper Victorian home at some point. When we renovated it, we found horsehair in the walls. Between literal animal trimmings being inside it and the activity I experience, I've always felt like the house has a wildness to it. Before we moved in during the summer of 2000, my grandfather owned the home. When he owned it, there were old portrait paintings that felt like they followed me across rooms, and when adventuring upstairs, a place he rarely went due to old age, it felt like uncovering another time. The bedroom that eventually became mine was a military room, filled with antique soldier uniforms and other items that I never fully learned the stories from. The rest of the floor had loads of other objects just like that. Simply put, the house had all of the ingredients for residual hauntings. To top things off, my grandfather ended up dying in the house, and that's what led me and my family to move in shortly after. It wasn't long before I'd hear footsteps from the upstairs during the day, or even in the hallways at night when everyone else was asleep. The footsteps could become so relentless that they'd even pace at the front of my own room at times. Exhausted, I'd ask the spirit to please stop and make sure I'd never sleep with my back to the room. Due to the footsteps mostly being upstairs, I was particularly creeped out up there. But when I was a teenager, our computer was at the top of the stairs in a little loft by the landing. Nothing, not even creepy footsteps, could keep me from updating my aim away message and video chatting with my boyfriend at that time. While happily tapping away at the computer, the entire upstairs was to my back. I always made sure of all of the lights were on to help me better cope with the feeling of being watched. One evening I was alone upstairs as I video chatted away. I was laughing so much that I wasn't thinking at all about the room behind me. It was in that moment that I felt the unmistakable feeling of a hand coming down my left shoulder and firmly resting there. It was so fast I didn't make a sound. Wide-eyed, I grasped my shoulder and twisted my neck to see who was there. No one. My head spun back to the screen and I asked my boyfriend if he saw who was behind me. He said he didn't know. Video cut out right before I turned my head. I just need to talk about this. Story 15. So throughout my entire life, I've been a hardcore atheist. I still don't believe there's a God out there, but that's beside the point. I didn't believe that we had souls, and I certainly didn't believe in ghosts. Recent experiences have led me to believe otherwise. I've been together with my current girlfriend for a little over 4 months. We met through mutual friends. I've been spending a lot of time with her over the past months, and it's been great. A month or so back, the freezer opened on its own and something falls out. She goes to put it back and acts like it's a common occurrence. I go to check on the freezer to see if it's easy to open, but you really need to apply some pressure to actually open it. But anyway, I don't really think much more of it and I just move on. Then one night when we're doing the hanky-panky, the TV switches from being set to the PS4 to regular TV. So some random program turns on and the remote was on the sofa about 2 meters away from the bed that they were on. So there's no way that could have been an accident. After calming down a bit and turning the TV off, we continue, kind of forget about that one time. When we go to the shower, I ask her if she had any idea what could have caused it. She said she did have good reason, but wasn't sure if she should tell me. She eventually gives in. Turns out she can see and talk to ghosts. And so can 2 of our mutual friends as well. I felt like my world had turned upside down. I'm a man of science. How can ghosts be real? Doesn't make any sense to me, but now there's no way that they aren't. If it is, or at least if it was just her, I would probably just think she's crazy. Since then, she's met my parents and talked to them about too. We also visited my grandma, which has had a lot of problems with ghosts. I just thought she was old and was probably just seeing things. She confirmed that there is a lot of activity there. She's also been at my place and says that there are about 5 or 6 ghosts here, 4 of which are connected to, I guess, my family in some way. This is just so crazy to me. Anyone else here know 100% that ghosts do in fact exist? Story number 16, High School Ghost. I would always hear these stories in my school about some ghost girl. I never took the stories seriously, and there were so many stories about encounters, which were so creepy. I remember hearing some girls saw a creepy white girl in a dress in my school's parking lot weeping. Another of a cold wind hitting a girl and hearing some loud screams. I would listen to this gossip during class and I never thought about it. I just dismissed these as rumors. This happened around 2017. I was aware of the stories, but I didn't really believe in them. My high school was literally a block away from where I live, and some friends invited me to go play some basketball at my school. We went as a routine and played every Thursday and Friday until 7 p.m. We would play on some basketball courts outside the gym. It wasn't until daylight savings when the days were getting darker. We decided to stay longer and mess around at my school. We would walk around the cafeteria or sit on some benches in some classrooms. No big deal, we were just hanging out. But we would see weird stuff like flickering lights and felt like we were being watched. We made the assumption that it's probably the custodians. It wasn't until I brought up the ghost girl that me and friends jokingly said that we were going to go look for the ghost girl. Got my phone out to see if I could record something. My friend told me about the ghost app, but I dismissed him. That I heard a ghost girl possibly say hi. It freaked me out, especially since it came from the cafeteria. I ran out and I was really afraid to go back. I got these unwelcome vibes and decided to take a break from basketball. I returned again with friends to go play some basketball. I completely dismissed my experience and just went to have fun. When it got dark, we took a break and we began exploring around the school, laughing and just gossiping. We went by the outdoor cafeteria tables, and we were looking for leftover food in the trash bin. Don't ask why. And I started hearing the wind whistle. I ignored it because of the nearby airport. We kept digging for trash, and we went to the school's auditorium. That's when my friend noticed the whistling too. "You guys hear that?" he says. We all got quiet, and those whistles soon turned into bone-chilling weeping. We all ran out of the auditorium and we were all spooked. I have it recorded too, but the audio isn't too good. One night I got up from bed to use the restroom and I could hear the weeping from outside my apartment. I kept going back despite me being scared, but I did stop exploring my high school at night. During summer school, the second floor of my school was going through construction. Me and my friend ran up the stairs, and in the corner of our eyes, we saw someone standing in the dark hallway. A dark silhouette was in front of us, and we awkwardly ran back. We kept talking about the second floor ghost and had our laughs. Didn't take it too seriously. It wasn't until last year, 2019, that I went to go gossip, and we decided to go to my school and relax. It was around 6 p.m. or 7. We were exiting the school, and I kept making jokes about my friend's crush. That was when I felt a gust of wind hit me, and I felt it wrap around me and pull me back. I soon had someone yell in my ear, "Hey!" and I screamed like a girl and ran out. I turned and saw no one near but my clueless friend. I was trembling and I didn't want to go back to my school again during the night. This experience still haunts me, especially because my high school is a block away, and I heard similar encounters as mine as well. There were many other stories, such as teachers and staff talking about their experiences. I stayed quiet most of the time, but I actually have one recording and I sometimes like bragging about it. I do want to visit my school again and talk to some of my old teachers and staff to see if I get any similar stories, but I haven't had the time to do so. That's the end of today's stories. See you later.